hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.
Welcome again to Street Talk. My name is Ahmad Shakaraki, and on Street Talk we did the political, social, and economics here in Michigan, the U.S., and abroad. Now joining me tonight,
Dennis Burnside,
Charles Thomas,
Paget Maynard.
We got a lot to cover, man, but we're going to talk some about reparation. And on October 9, we're going to have a march. No, not a march. We're going to gather at the state capitol, the front steps there, and we from 12 to 2, and we're going to be talking about reparation because as millions of black people just don't know anything about reparation. When Miss Carol House in 1889, she started reparation, looking at all of the slaves, how they was wearing rag clothes and all of this. She started reparation, and the U.S. just simply ran her out, and she died in 1928, and since 1928 up until 2015, we couldn't even get anybody to talk about it, really. So what happened now? We can at least put some more effort in trying to get reparation.
Well, I think there's a couple things that need to be stressed about reparations, and there have been several attempts. John Conyers' House Bill HS 40, and others have attempted to restart this conversation. Mm-hmm. But before we can talk about reparations, I think we need to define why reparations for Africans in America is separate and distinct and unique compared to any other effort worldwide.
Okay.
And then we need to talk about precedents, because there have been other incidents where the United States government has willingly paid reparations. Mm-hmm. Why are we different? Well, I think the one reason why we're different is the reason why the transatlantic slave trade was so unique in its brutality. You'll hear Uncle Toms like Thomas Sowell, mm-hmm. Conservative commentators, Candace Owens, mm-hmm. those types. They'll talk about the fact that, well, they had slavery in Africa. There's slavery all over the world. There's been slavery since the dawn of mankind. Well, first of all, we don't know that, because much of antiquity's day-to-day cultures and histories have been lost. Mm-hmm. We know the big frame, we know the whens and wheres, but we don't know the minutia of how they lived. Mm-hmm. But if you look up into the time of what we call from the Nile Valley forward and look at different periods of time where human beings enslaved others, it was always in a format that was temporary.
Right.
You were enslaved for a period of time. You were enslaved for potential costs that you would have to pay off. You were not dehumanized.
Right.
You were not told that you were no more than an animal.
Right.
Your wife could not be taken away from you at the moment's notice and sold off as if she was enslaved.
Right. Oh,
Your
gee,
children wouldn't be born
Right.
into slavery and have no rights.
Right.
You could not be murdered at a moment's notice with no rights and no recourse. You could not have your children, your brother, your wife, your mother murdered with no recourse.
Right.
You could not have your family taken away and split up into fragments and dispersed who knows where. All of those things happened here in America during the transatlantic slave treatment, and that made chattel slavery, and that's what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
chattel
It did.
slavery, completely unique.
Would you say then that, based on what you just said, would you say that back then, slavery was, you might say, more like an imprisonment, a punishment? You owe me, I could take your son to be my slave for so many years or till you repay it or whatever. Would you say that is fair?
I think that's a good synopsis, Pageant. A lot of times we saw this in the motherland in Africa when you had collection, intertribal, internation war. You saw where prisoners of war would be taken and they would be imprisoned and enslaved for a period of time, and they could work that off. And in many cases, you saw enslaved people become members of the community within which they were enslaved. They could become leaders. They could join that army. Same thing went on in Greece. Same thing went on in Persia. Same thing went on in Eastern Europe. In fact, where we get the name slave, let me rephrase that. Where we get the term Slavic people comes from the fact that Eastern Europeans, who we now look at Belarus and Georgia and Western Russia and Yugoslavia, those nations that they call Slavic people, they were frequently enslaved by Western Europeans. But it wasn't that they were reduced to animals. It wasn't that they were reduced to having no rights. It wasn't that they were reduced to having no expectation of ever being free again and their children would be free. So when you hear one of these coons like Kundus Owens or Uncle Thomas Sowell or even some of the white Republicans who try to make it minimized, make sure that you understand that we're talking about an entirely different animal.
Brutality.
We're talking about the difference between somebody playing basketball in the driveway and Michael Jordan. And what we had here in the United States was the Michael Jordan of slavery, chattel slavery, brutal, horrible. It went on for over 400 years. It started in 1619, and it was what the United States was built on. Then you have to look at, when you start talking about why it was necessary, because the brutality of chattel slavery was so unique. Then you have to start talking about the economic realities of it. You could take an example like Haiti, or Haiti. When they were the jewel of the French colony empire, they were worth more than any other industry, any other enterprise, any other effort by any other colonizer anywhere in the world. The enslaved Africans of Haiti brought more value, more riches to France than anything Britain did by going over to India and stealing their tea and their labor and their wood. Anything that Spain did by coming over to the United States and enslaving and stealing gold and precious metals from the indigenous people. Any effort that you could point at all over the world, and you can look at most of the European nations and you should know that most of them were involved in the transatlantic slave trade because it was so lucrative. So that's where we have to set it up. The first thing is it was unique and brutal. Second thing it was uniquely lucrative and attractive monetarily for those people. So when you look at those two things, you have to say, well, if we're going to evaluate this, we can't look at this as if it was the same old slavery we saw everywhere else in the world, and we can't look at this and say we can pay them off with a couple $1,000s each. It's just not going to work that way.
And you haven't even talked about the psychological damage that it did to us as a people.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to define.
Right.
And you know, once cotton was discovered here, that's when they really tightened down on slave. You know, it's like, okay.
Yeah, tobacco.
Yeah, well,
But cotton in particular.
Yeah.
Because cotton was, if you look at the treatment of enslaved Africans in Haiti, was brutal. They were worked to death.
Oh yeah.
And one area in the United States where it was nearly as bad, not quite as bad,
South.
but nearly as bad, was in Mississippi. In Mississippi, when you saw an enslaved African learn that his brother, his friend, his wife, his daughter had been sent away, they'd always ask, where are they going? Where are they going?
Yeah.
And if they found out they were going to the Mississippi, they would say, oh, they're going to the coffin.
Yeah.
They called it the coffin
Yeah.
because you would work to death.
Yeah.
So it was completely brutal. And then once you look at those two things, the brutality of it, the inhumanity of it, and the economic leg up that enslaved Africans gave the United States, that has established it as the richest nation in the history of the planet as far as Western civilization is concerned. I would dispute that if you look at some of the ancient civilizations and the wealth they had. But not for the sake of argument, let's say you're right. The United States is the richest nation in the history of the world. How is that wealth built? It was built by theft. It was built by enslavement. It
Murder.
was built by brutality, murder,
Lie.
rape, kidnapping, torture. And we have to address that. You just can't let that go unaddressed. Which speaks to the psychological damage, because we come from generation after generation after generation after generation of traumatized people. We saw an article that came out in the New York Times, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, and it showed where scientists were able to define a genetic alteration of the code, of the DNA code of the survivors of the Holocaust, and their children, and their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. People who had not been placed in the concentration camps themselves, yet they bore a physical marker of that trauma. Now, we know that trauma, if that was coded into the DNA after 6 or 7 years of trauma, well, you can imagine what's in our DNA after being taken from our homeland, having our spirituality, our culture, our language, everything about our style of living taken away from us, and immersed in this brutal, murderous system. What kind of damage has that done to our psyche and our physiology?
And then
the blood pressure, the cholesterol, the stress.
And then what kind of people will bring their children and watch a man get barbecued or get hung? They would sell out hotels. They would sell out towns.
Oh yeah, they put up notices and they send out postcards. And they take burned pieces of bone and send it as a souvenir.
To them, it wasn't a human.
Yeah.
You know?
But the whole thing is, with all you're saying there, has anybody, with all now we have black studies and all of that, has anybody taken time to look into any possibility of the DNA reconstruction in us? I mean, that may not be the best word to use, but you understand.
Yeah, the alterations.
The alteration.
Yeah. George DeGroote?
That's a good question, Patrick. I don't know the answer to that. There could be, but I do know that the science, the accuracy of the science has been established. When you could look at the genetic marker of Jewish people before the Holocaust, and then look at those same markers, the same DNA, and find unique markers that are born of stress that came after the Holocaust. We know that because of the humanity, the mutual humanity that we all share, the same thing must have happened to the Native Americans. The same thing must have happened to enslaved Africans here. So we know that there is long-term damage. Then you start talking about, okay, we establish the fact that Africans enslaved in America made the United States the jewel of the world in terms of economic power. Here's another example. At the time of the Civil War, when the Civil War started in 1861 and ended in 1865, you had heavy industry in the North. You had timber. You had textiles. You had Wall Street, the beginning of Wall Street, which is another story for another day, how that name came to be. But in the South, you had cotton, tobacco, sugar cane, and agriculture.
Guys,
Which was the most valuable?
God.
Which was the most valuable? The South.
Yeah.
The South was the richest because
Yeah.
they had enslaved Africans. They didn't have technology.
No.
They didn't have innovation. They had human beings that they worked to death for
Yeah.
free.
Out of fear.
Yeah, worked to death for free and reaped the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And that made the South at the time of the Civil War the most rich
Yep.
portion of any nation anywhere
Yeah.
in the world.
And Dennis, you got to go back and you realize when they talk about emancipation here, it was not in the interest of the slaves.
No.
It was
No.
to cripple the southern whites
Yeah.
to make sure they didn't have the money coming in so they can get weapons and fight the North.
Right, right.
You know, so it wasn't about us. Next thing is, any of you ever had a chance to go in a cotton field?
Oh,
Yeah, I have. I definitely have.
Now,
Couple
could you
times.
imagine sun up to sundown
Hey.
Every day.
Yeah.
daily,
Yeah.
and you'll get a whooping if you're not going fast
Yeah.
enough?
Right.
Hey.
Yeah.
Do you ever stop to realize how hot it is in a cotton field?
Right, right,
Hey.
right. And
But if you look at the lives of enslaved Africans, you know, and it angers me sometimes. I hear some ignorant black sports commentator like Charles Barkley or somebody talk
Oh,
about,
man.
well, you know, the reason why we're so big and strong and fast is we were bred that way during enslavement. Look, fool, we're that way because we were made that way by the Creator. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the lifespan of an enslaved African during enslavement, the average life was around 48
Yeah.
years.
Mhm.
You had a life full of injury. You had a life full of disease.
Yep.
You had bad teeth. You had tooth decay.
Yep.
You didn't have access to good nutrition.
No.
People lived horrible, depleted lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was because it was cheaper in their mind
Yeah.
to just replace a man or
slave.
woman who worked
Yeah.
to death
Yeah.
than to feed them properly.
Yeah.
Besides, you don't want them to get too strong. They might pick up a gun
Yeah.
and do what Frederick Douglass
yeah.
did
Yeah.
and beat his
Just-
master.
just gonna
beat
say
his
that,
master's
yeah.
ass.
You
Yeah.
know, when you talk about the diet, you know what was a treat to slaves, African slaves? When they get a piece of a rotten herring.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was a treat
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the way you're going to treat the people who are enriching you, because it's their labor that is
But-
bringing you wealth.
Yeah.
Now, why in the name of good heavens, people couldn't see that the
But-
better we treat them is the more we can get out of
Productive.
them.
But,
Yeah.
but the thing is, Patrick, you wasn't considered human.
Ah,
But here's
Yeah.
another thing
And
about
they
it,
were
Patrick.
ignorant.
If you have livestock, sheep, cattle, whatever, a herd of chicken, you're going to feed them well. Because the better you feed them, the better the results are, right? You're going to get more eggs, you're going to get more. But if you feed a man and a woman who's got a brain and a memory of what it was to be free, or an idea of what it is to be free, he might pick up something and put you down. And if you don't believe it,
Yeah.
look at Haiti circa 1794
I mean, to
through
some.
1804. They actually went from a people who were being worked to death
Yep.
to a people who rose up, defeated the French, defeated the British, defeated the Spanish,
Oh.
defeated the French again, and established the first democracy of ex-enslaved people in the history of the world. That's the danger of feeding people to.
But you got to remember the difference there, you know. I think you brought it out some time ago, we were here, that the French in Haiti, those folks didn't lose. They kept the people, they were one people. They were not scattered abroad like here. So it was easier for them to come together and fight. And that's why guys like Toussaint was able to really marshal the forces and did the damage they did to the French.
Well, it started even before Toussaint. There was a brother named Bookman
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
was so well regarded by his enslaver that he let him drive his carriage and deliver information and goods from plantation to plantation, which should be called concentration camps, labor camps. And in doing so, Bookman was passing on information, and they started planning. I should chastise myself. I can't remember the sister's name, but
Yeah.
there was a sister who worked with Bookman, and they used song and dance to
Yep.
communicate. You had people who came from the same geographic area of Africa in many
Dialect.
cases, who
Yeah,
spoke the
yeah.
same dialect,
Same
same language,
language.
had the same tradition,
Yeah.
same military training. Because the French again were too greedy to split them up like they did in North America and South America, that they just brought them in by the bushelful, and it ended up hitting them in the butt. But if you look at precedent, do we have precedent for reparations? Well, yeah, we actually do. I took a few notes. We had one passed in 1988 called the Civil Liberties Act, and it was focused on the Japanese who were interned during World War II.
Yeah.
We're talking about 80,000 people, and they were given the equivalent of $20,000 each. Some of those were the actual human beings who had been interned, but many were their survivors, their heirs. Then you had the Fugitive American Act. This was focused on the Native Americans, and this went on from 1946 to 1978. And it was monetary awards given to about 178 different Indian nations that worked out to about 1.36 billion. Big money? Nah, it was about $1,000 each. And it assiduously, carefully excluded land. You're not getting your land back.
No.
We'll give you $1,000, or we'll give you a little permission to build some casinos on your land. But we're not giving you the land back, and we're not going to give you much more than that. Then you had the South African Truth and Reconciliation movement. Again, it was an effort made to just tell the damn truth about what you did to us and apologize.
Yeah.
So as we speak now, the Boers, the Dutch, still have control of the economy of South Africa, with the exception of a few wealthy blacks.
Yeah.
And most of the blacks still live in poverty. They got an apology, they got an acknowledgement, but it really hasn't changed things on the ground. And then we have two more recently. We had a case in Chicago where there's this detective named John Wern, I believe his name is. I'd have to double check that. But this man, after becoming a detective in 1972, he went on about a 18-year spree of torturing with cattle prods, fire, baseball bats. Innocent black men, many of them were sentenced to death in capital murder cases. Many of them had lifetime sentences, and the majority of them had long stretches in brutal state pens. It's completely innocent men. Well, they got a nominal settlement, and this dirty pig was fired and sentenced to prison. That's a form of reparations. Then just recently we saw the city that Evanston, Illinois, where Northwestern is, they just offered a nominal amount to their enslaved Africans, the descendants of enslaved Africans, and offered them reparations as a way to say, we know there's a moral wrong here, we just want to make a symbolic effort. But what we're talking about here in the United States, for people like us who had our ancestors enslaved here, we're talking about trillions of dollars in value. That is owed. It is owed. It's not a moral thing. It's actually money that's owed.
Right.
A question for you guys.
Yes.
Has America gone anywhere overseas, done whatever, destroyed a place and whatnot, and then turn around, pay them back by fixing everything,
Look at Vietnam.
and give them money?
Vietnam.
The Marshall Plan after World War II.
Yeah.
And where they dropped the bomb at?
In Japan.
Hiroshima,
Nagasaki.
They got reparations.
Reparations have been paid frequently.
The reason why I asked that, why is it easy for them to pay it up over there, but not here?
Well,
they don't have no respect for us.
No, that's it right there. You know, when you have to go back again and look at, man, 400 years, 400 years we've been, first we wasn't human, and later they said, well, they human, but as long as they keep
human.
Yeah. Well, not only that, in their so-called Bible, they say that Ham was cursed and he had to be a slave to all the rest of the people. And they use that.
And Chuck, don't let anybody twist that around.
They did.
Because people do twist that and make it sound that we are born to be slaves.
Yeah, but the thing is, Patrick, when they've got us where they want us, man, and hey, they okay with it.
I think it's more than that. I think it's a realization they have a tiger by the tail. And if you
Yeah.
If you have people down and you have your knee on their neck, and we're all, millions of George Floyds, what happens when you pull your knee off George Floyd's neck and you give him proper education, you give him proper nutrition, you give him proper housing, you give him proper life where he can pursue happiness?
Right.
What happens to the myth of white superiority?
Right.
What happens
Right.
to the myth of white supremacy?
Right.
What happens to all the easy glide paths for the mediocre white male who can just get by in high school, get by in college, do a lot of drinking and partying, and know he's going to land on his feet with a good corporate job, with a good pension at the end of the day. And the reason why we have so many resentful, hateful, working class white men and women now who are part of the MAGA movement is because they have been thrown overboard by the economy too, since the 1980s when Ronald Reagan turned this into a mythical trickle-down economy.
Right.
This Milton Friedman Chicago school economy that says just cut the taxes on the rich and it'll trickle down to the rest of you. And if we ship your jobs overseas, we'll train you how to do fix computers and everything will be fine. So those people have resentment. They're flaying around in the dark blind like so many of us, not knowing who caused their problem and why. But they can always point to them and say, hey man, as bad as you have it, at least you ain't one of them.
Well, and that's what I've been saying all the time. It's like ever since I've been big enough, and when Dennis mentioned it about these people, as long as they are and long as they are white, they think they're better than somebody of color.
Tell you what I think. A big factor here to me is that the white man who has enslaved and ill-treated the blacks is afraid that if the blacks are allowed to get up, they're going to return the favor. But
revenge.
Blacks are not that kind of a people.
Well,
if you look good, the blacks were taking care of their babies, cooking their food, and all this. Did you ever hear of a black poison the white man because of what he did? And now I'm your cook, I could poison you?
Well,
I have actually.
Yes.
That happened in Haiti.
How many cases of that you got?
Well, I think I get your overall point.
I'm talking about in terms of on a general basis.
Yeah, I get your overall point.
It was always the black man doing the cooking and all of that.
Yeah,
I think I get your general point, and that point is if their knees taken off our neck and we're given the free hand and reimbursed for our expenses, we're not going to do to them what they did.
No.
Go about your business, do your thing.
Yeah, we're not that devilish.
Yeah, we're not going to act that way. Yeah. But if your concern is you're going to have to give up your privilege, you're going to have to give up being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple.
Yeah.
That's going to be gone.
Yeah.
Now we have to do some meritocracy.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of this is competition.
Right. And on top. And I think we need an ally, because of the disrespect. But if we plugged up and had an ally with Africa or Ghana, with a bigger voice. And I read this. There's an African country that's asking for reparations for what they did to us.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine, messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.